What about current claims that the G20 would somehow help the world move out of this current crisis and perhaps introduce a different kind of governance in world finance? Are you hopeful that the G20 might achieve that?
Look, I think it was the right thing to broaden out from the G8. The G8 was an anachronistic body. It excluded a lot of the important players in the world economy. And so it was time to move to something bigger. One can debate whether G20 was a bit too much, or whether it should be G13, 15, whatever, but I think some expansion is right. The problem with any international body is where are its teeth. In the end, banking regulation relies on lender of last resort from central banks. It relies on taxpayer bailouts when these banks get into trouble. And these central banks and these taxpayer resources are national. And that's why people make the joke, financial institutions are global in life, but national in death. And because they are national in death, it's going to be difficult for the G20 to really have a lot of authority, because in the end, the big decisions are made at a national level. Brazil has understandably experimented now with controlling the capital flying into your country. That's not something you're going to ask the G20 about. You're going to make a decision in your own interest. And in the same way, American monetary policy is too loose now for the rest of the world. It's inflating bubbles around the world. But US monetary policy is going to be targeted at US job creation. We've got 10% unemployment in the US. And so you can't expect the Federal Reserve to do something different. So I have some skepticism about the ability of these international bodies, particularly ones without a secretariat and so forth, to really make a big difference.
Cynics would claim that perhaps instead of the G20, what really matters at the end of the day would be a G2, say, between the US and China. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I think the G2 is problematic because you'll just have a sort of standoff. You saw when Barack Obama went there recently to Beijing and said, couldn't you do something about your currency policy? And the answer was, no, we couldn't. And the Chinese said to the US, couldn't you do something about your interest rates? They're way too low. And the answer was, no, we can't. So I don't think the G2 solves anything magically either. And so I would rather have a more representative, more inclusive body. And in fact, I think the best way sometimes to resolve these deadlocks between within Chimerica, between China and America, is to get other people around the table to take sides and say, actually, on this issue, America, we really do feel that you need to do something different about the way you regulate finance. It's not just China saying it, it's Brazil, it's Russia, it's India, it's the European Union. I think that would have more power. And at the same time now, I regret the fact that in Brazil's dealings with China, it does not say anything, as far as I can see, about China's currency policy. I think China's currency policy is a major problem for Brazil. Brazilians' currency is appreciated enormously this year. That really threatens your manufacturing sector, it seems to me. And you should be screaming about it, but you are totally silent in Brazil. And that's a problem. So I think a G20 kind of environment where you get the opinions of lots of countries is more likely to put pressure on the big guys, China and America, than just G2.
A final question is more of a philosophical note, if you want. Is liberalism dead?
Now you have to define. Do you mean 19th century
No, I mean
liberalism?
20th century neoliberalism, if you like.
I see. Okay, because in the United States, when people say liberal, they actually mean the Democrats and that sort of thing. No, we don't mean that. We mean
sense of the term.
No, I actually don't think liberalism is dead. The reason is that finance has always been viewed as an exception. There's always been, since the early 20th century, a sort of special case with regulation of banks. Deposit insurance in the United States was created after the Depression in the 1930s. So that's the government coming in and saying, we will guarantee deposits in a private bank. So liberalism never really applied to banks for the last 80 years. So I think what we've seen is a need to radically rethink how we deal with the financial sector. But I think if you look at, the manufacturing outside of finance, if you look at services trade, agriculture and so forth, I think the old arguments in favor of freer trade and so forth still apply there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mallaby.
Sure. Thanks.